Welcome, my dear student, in the next chapter of Political Science, Standard 9, that is chapter number 6, International Problems. In this chapter, we are going to study that what are the problems that related to all over the world. It is not limited to one particular nation. So let us see that what are that problems which relate to overall nations or overall country. So let's begin with our chapter that is international problems. So the topics that we will be covering in this chapter are introduction to the chapter, human rights, secure environment, Stockholm to Paris conference, cause for the terrorism, and problems related to the refugees. So let us begin with our chapter that is international problems. Children, as in the earlier chapters, we have studied about the sovereign state in the international system, Indian foreign policy, Indian defense system. We also have studied about the objectives of the United Nations. In this chapter, that is in chapter number 6, we are going to study some of the important international problems. As we all know that some problems are not restricted to one country. They affect many other countries and eventually all countries of the world. These problems that affect the whole world is called as international problems. In order to solve these international problems, all nations need to make joint efforts. In this chapter, we will be studying the problems related to human rights, environment, and terrorism. Even the question of refugees are now amusing the global proportion. Hence, we should also consider the issue as well. So, children, let us begin with the first problem that is the human rights. Human rights. What is human rights? The concept of human rights has emerged from the concept of natural rights. Now, what is this natural rights? The natural rights are those rights that are endowed with us because we are born as a human beings. Human rights are those rights that are necessary for living as a human being and as a constituent of society. For example, the American and the French Revolution proclaimed liberty, equality, fraternity, and justice as a human rights. The idea that in order to realize these rights, a democratic form of government is essential and was strengthened. After that, several European nations adopted the democratic constitution and the governments. This brought limits on the authority of the state. The main responsibility of the state came to be understood to be the protection of the citizens' rights. Let us see that how the rise of the concept of the human rights in the international relations related. Rise of the concept of the human rights in the international relations. Let us say that how human rights has been deals with the international relations. After the United Nations was established in the year 1945, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was prepared. Now, in this declaration, which was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly by the majority of votes on 10th December 1948. In the year 1966, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the International Covenant on Civil and the Political Rights. The word covenant means an agreement, as well as internal covenant on economic, social, and the cultural rights. These two covenants, that is, the international covenant as well as the internal covenant, are the part of international law. Member nations of the United Nations are bound with this covenant law, and they have to follow whatever has been mentioned in this law. The The question of the human rights was raised in the United Nations General Assembly on several occasions during the Cold War period. Racial discrimination or racial segregation in Africa was said to be against the human rights, and hence it was decided to boycott the regime there. It means to boycott the government who is working at that, who is functioning at that particular place. Freedom for colonies and insistence on the democratic system could be cited as the example of the same. In the modern time, problems like the struggle against racism, border disputes, terrorism, as well as jeopardizing human rights on a large scale. Apart from this, the concept of human rights has broadened due to the several issues of global nature like contagious diseases, the threat of environment, natural disaster, etc. Human rights today also includes goals like protection of environment and sustainable development. It also deals the problems related to the rights to live, food, clothing, shelter, education, and health. Now let us understand that how human right related to India. Human rights and India. In the Indian Constitution, human rights have been given the place of fundamental rights, as we all aware that. The Constitution gives the responsibility of the protection of the weaker sections like women and minorities to the government, alongside that of the fundamental rights. In the year 1993, the Human Rights Protection Act was passed. As per this law, the National Human Rights Commission and the State Human Rights Commission was set up. The Human Rights Commission is responsible for taking cognizance of the complaint regarding violation of human rights and take appropriate actions regarding such violations. Sri Justice H.L. Dattu, who is the chairperson of National Human Rights Commission of India today. He has been appointed on 29 February 2016. Secure environment. In the present times, the concept of human rights has become broader and it is increasingly being accepted that a secure environment is an important human right. At the international level, the awareness and the need of saving the environment was expressed in 1970. The experts studying the environment believe that due to the industrialization on a large scale and the increasing needs for energy has endangered the environment. These activities celebrated the first Earth Day on 22 April 1970. Chemical fertilizers and pesticides used in agriculture, sound population due to vehicles, radiations from nuclear reactors, oil leakages or leakages of chemical gases makes the environment unsafe and create various problems. As a result of this awareness, the question of environmental safety began to discuss at the international level. After the wave of globalization that started in the year 1990, the interdependence among nations increased, and therefore a need for nations to cooperate with each other is important. The threat to the environment caused by the pollution or by the leakage of oil or gases does not remain restricted to one nation. It also affects others in a long term. It became necessary for these effects. The visual effects on the decline of environment are extinction of species of plants and animals, decrease in the fertility of soil, water shortage, fluctuation in the proportion of rainfall, global warming, drying up of rivers and lakes, pollution of rivers and seas, incidence of newer diseases, acid rain, thinning of the ozone layer, etc. Even if some of these are restricted to a particular nation, these problems reach global proportion due to their long-term effects, while some problems are inherently of global nature. To deal with all these problems related to the environment and the protection of the environment, a conference has been called in Paris, which was known as a Stockholm Conference or a Paris Conference, in order to discuss the immediate and long-term problem related to the environment and to find solutions on them. A United Nations Conference on Human Environment was called at Stockholm from 5th to 16th June 1972. Stockholm Declaration has highly influenced in the development of international problems related to the environmental law and the policies. Declaration containing 26 principles in general regarded as the foundation of modern international environmental laws. The creation of UNEP and the landmark achievement of Stockholm Declaration. In this conference, it was stressed that it was the responsibility of all nations to cooperate and to overcome with the problem of pollution. They also discussed that the developing nations feel that the developed nations are more responsible for the decline of environment and they should take the responsibility for stopping the decline. Even today, the developing countries take the same position. The another feature of this conference was that non-governmental organizations working in the field of environmental protections were also present. The issues of the protection of the common global wealth was raised. The consensus emerged that it was the responsibility of all nations to protect these resources. It was after this conference the United Nations created United Nations Environmental Program, that is UNEP. Many international theories about environment were signed after this conference. Several rules were set up about the protection of the environment. Environmental movements started on a large scale at the national as well as at the international levels. Non-governmental organizations also assumed a bigger role in the decision-making process at the international conference regarding the environment. The next stage was the environmental conference which was held at Rio in the year 1992. In this conference, the idea of sustainable development was stressed. Different treaties regarding biodiversity, climate change due to greenhouse gases, protection of forests, etc. were signed. In the year 1997, the other conference at Kyoto laid down the protocol for the developed countries for preventing climate change. These were applicable for 15 years. After this conference, a conference on climate change was held at Paris in November 2015. An appeal was made in this conference that all nations should make concerned efforts to stop climate change and global warming, and that the developed countries should help the developing countries to acquire the technology to achieve these goals. Oceans, deep seabed, atmosphere, outer space, genetic resources are included in the global resources. Since this wealth of resources belong to all the nations of the world, it is expected that all nations should look after these resources as well. Terrorism. Terrorism is a major problem of today's time. Several countries in the world are facing this problem. No nation is capable of countering terrorism entirely on its own. Hence, terrorism is considered to be a global problem. Now, let us see that what is terrorism, what terrorism means to us. What is terrorism? Terrorism is spreading fear and terror in a society by using or by threatening to use violence against common and innocent people for achieving the political goal. Means terrorism is a kind of a threat which is used in the way of violence against the common and the innocent people for achieving some of the selected goals. Terrorism is organized and planned violence. Terrorism has made a deep and long term impact on the international politics. Terrorist conflict is different from the traditional war. Traditional war is a conflict between two or more sovereign states. In such war, the geographical boundaries between nations acquire importance. That is, national security is connected with geographical boundaries. On the other hand, in the case of terrorism, terrorist groups can cause violence in any part of the world from anywhere in the world. The aim of the terrorist attack is not to endanger the geographical boundaries but to challenge a regime in a country or refuse to acknowledge the existence of the state. This means that due to the increasing terrorism, the internal security of a country is threatened in addition to its external security. In order to curb terrorism, the word curb means a check or restraint on something. It is imperative that the security mechanism of different nations should work in a concerned manner. The problems of refugees. Children, let us see that to whom we call as a refugees. People who have to leave their motherland against their wishes, or they are forced to go to other nations seeking refuge or for security are called as refugees. People became refugees due to torture or persecution for belonging to a particular race or religion, or due to war or disaster, etc. In such situation, people are forced to leave their own country and seek shelter in some other country. Before the Second World War, the Jews were tortured in Germany. Their citizenship and property was confiscated. Due to this, the Jews were due to this the Jews became refugees. In the year 1971, the people in the East Pakistan turned refugee and came to India seeking refuge due to the political and the religious persecution. In the last few years, due to the war-like situation in Iraq and Syria, a lot of people are living Syria as a refugees. We can cite many such problems as an example of refugees. When the people of any country are forced to leave their own country as refugees, they have to face many problems. The most important problem is to decide where to go and will that nation will give shelter to them. These are the questions that they generally face. Secondly, they have also take along with them other members of their families. It involves a lot of physical and emotional stress. Apart from this, there are problems caused by natural elements like heat, rain, storm, as well as shortage of food, sickness, etc. In this process, many people loses their lives too. When refugees reach to a safe place, they have new challenges. They need to find work, a place to live, and other problem of day-to-day nature. If the language and the culture in the other nation are different, then they have to adjust to that pose difficulties. There is no assurance that the people in the nation which gives shelter to the refugees will accept them. On the contrary, as the number of refugees increases, the strain on the economy of the host nation increases. A shortage of essential goods is created. There may be an increase in crime or even in fluctuations. The locals may lose their jobs. Problem of law and order may crop up. Many such problems may emerge. Due to these problems, many nations are not ready to give shelter to refugees and to resettle them. In the year 1951, some provisions were made regarding the question of refugees at the international level. One such provision was that the refugees will not be forcefully sent back to their countries against their wishes. Similarly, an office of the Higher Commission of the United Nations has been established to solve their problems. If all nations safeguarded and fostered human rights, exploitations and violence would reduce. All people will be able to achieve their own development safely and securely. Human rights can be more effectively implemented if the environment is safeguarded and if terrorism is completely wiped out. No group of people will have to become refugees. For this, all nations have to come together, cooperate with each other, and take concrete action and bring about actual change. Let us come to the exercise or the question answers of the given chapter. So question number 1, choose the right option and rewrite the sentence. First one, which among the following is an international problem? So the answer for the question is option number C, that is problem of refugees. Let us move to the next question. Which among the following rights are not included in human rights? So the answer is option B, that is right to information. Third one, which among the following days is observed as an international level? So the answer for the question is option C, Earth Day. Now let's move to the next question, that is write short notes. First one, human rights. So as we all have studied that what is human rights. So the concept of the human rights has emerged from the concept of natural rights. Natural rights are those rights that are endowed with because we are born as a human beings. Human rights are those rights that are necessary for living as a human being and as a constituent of society. Let's come to the next question, that is terrorism. Terrorism is spreading fear and terror in a society by using or threatening to use violence against common and innocent people for achieving political goals. Terrorism has made a deep and long-term impact on the international politics. In the last 2 decades, terrorist conflicts appear to have intensified in different countries. Terrorist conflict is different from the traditional war, as in the traditional war, there is a conflict between two or more sovereign states. In such war, the geographical boundaries between nations acquire importance. That is, national security is connected with geographical boundaries. Whereas, on the other hand, in the case of terrorism, terrorist groups can cause violence in any part of the world from anywhere in the world. The aim of the terrorist attack is not to endanger the geographical boundaries but to challenge the regime in a country or refuse to acknowledge the existence of the state. This means that due to increasing terrorism, the internal security of a country is threatened in addition to its external security. Let us move to the next question, that is problems of refugees. So people who have to leave their motherland against their wishes or they are forced to go to other nations seeking refuge or for security are called as a refugee. People became refugees due to torture or persecution for belonging to a particular race or religion, due to war or disaster, etc. In such situation, people are forced to leave their own country and seek shelter in other countries. As the number of refugees increases, the strain on the economy of the host nation increases. A shortage of essential goods is credited. This may be increase in crime or even inflation. The local may lose their jobs. A problem of law and order may crop up. Many such problems may emerge. Due to this problem, many nations are not ready to give shelter to the refugees and resettle them. So, children, with this we have end our chapter. To understand the chapter better, kindly read the textbook thoroughly and watch the video.